You studied engineering at IIT Delhi and then did an MBA. So how did you decide on those paths?
Going to IIT Delhi gave me a big edge in life. I was one of 11 girls in a class of 370.
There's an enormous pressure in India to have it figured out very early in your life. So what would you say to a girl who feels lost?
I say no one has a plan. It's a lie when people say they have it all figured out. So that should never bother you.
Sometimes I feel that people choose career paths like based on fear. And how can someone shift that towards choosing on the basis of meaning and purpose?
You're asking me tough questions now, Kimaya, but that's a real thing. That's a real thing.
What's one lesson life taught you the hard way that you wish someone had told you when you were my age, like 17?
You have to go far in life. You have to
Hi everyone, and welcome back to another episode of She Means Business podcast. Today's guest is someone whose journey is not only inspiring, but it's incredibly important for every young girl in India to hear. I'm talking about Ms. Prachi Jain Windlass, the head of a large global foundation. She's an IIT Delhi and University of Chicago graduate, and now she's working on solving one of the largest problems in India, education. Her work directly impacts millions of students and educators, and yet her story began, just like many of ours, as a young girl in India trying to figure out her path. This episode is for every student who's wondered, am I on the right path? Can I make an impact on the world? Let's dive into the story, insights, and advice of a woman who's walking that path with purpose. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you, Kimaya.
Before we get into all the serious stuff, what's one thing about your teenage self that would surprise us today?
I tried to be very athletic when I was a teenager and failed at all attempts of it.
And what was the dream job you had when you were 15, and has it changed a lot since then?
My dream job was to be heading a large technology company, and it has changed dramatically from then.
But you're still heading.
I'm still heading, but not a tech company
Yeah.
like I had thought.
And when you were a teenager in India, what did the world around you tell you about success and how it should look? And how has that changed over time?
Yeah, that has changed a lot. I think it has changed dramatically. I grew up in India in the 80s and the 90s, and the economy was just opening up then. Maybe if you'll go back and look at the opportunities which were available in India at that time, they were not as many as tech. Government jobs were considered very lucrative. There were probably more jobs in the government than they were in the private sector. Startups was an unknown world back then. So yeah, I think when I was growing up, the advice I was getting and what everyone around me was doing was very different. One, I would say, it was very academically oriented. The only path that anyone coming from middle class had to be successful was to do well in academics and get into one of the top colleges and then follow that path. The second will be that you actually get into a government job and make it through that. Or I think the third would have been, you leave the country and you go somewhere else, which is dramatically different from how the opportunities in India today are, both the diversity of them as well as the options that we have within India to make a big difference happen.
And there is this invisible curriculum in Indian schools, and that the only acceptable lives are ones where you become a doctor, engineer, or banker. And where do you think that belief system goes wrong?
Well, I would say, Kimaya, I don't entirely believe that's true in the Indian education system or in the education system, but not in the Indian psyche any longer. I think kids like you and many others are more creative, they're more imaginative, they're willing to work harder and explore more. We also are at a different point than we used to be many years ago, where you couldn't take those kinds of risks. We are fortunate that your generation can take more risks than our generation could, and I think so. Kids, I think, have expanded it beyond medicine and engineering as their only choices, and I'm so glad that that has happened in India. But are we opening up as much in our curriculum or changing as much in our curriculum to support those changing choices? And for the kids, I agree that we are still lagging, but I think the kids are pouncing ahead of the curriculum and not letting that be their limitation.
And what did you learn about ambition and worth when you were growing up, and how did that change once you stepped into the real world?
So I was one value which was always very close to me was always doing best at whatever I was doing and never be afraid of failure. And that's something that my parents instilled in me and supported me with from a very early stage. We were in our family, we were never looked down upon or ridiculed for not having tried something and not being successful at it. That's something which was never a conversation. The conversation was always about trying and working hard and the value of effort. So so that's something which I feel is a value which has not changed for me from the time when I was growing up, when I was in college, in my entire career. The moment is always here and now. You give it your best, and then really, it very honestly doesn't matter what comes out of it.
What positive impact has this mindset had on you?
I think I've had my setbacks, which all of us have during our careers and work lives. I think my setbacks have impacted me less than I've seen they have impacted many of my friends and colleagues, because after a setback or after a failure or after not having gotten what I was working for, I could never look back and say that, oh, I did not do this or I did not do that or I didn't work hard enough. It always seemed like, look, I did my best. I did whatever I could in that moment. And yes, what I got is, what I'm going to march on ahead with. So that I think fastened up or sped up my career a little, because I was never sort of, crying over things which did not happen or feeling bad about things which were not happen, but really valuing what I got and feeling proud of myself and marching ahead from there.
And what part of growing up as a girl in India gave you an edge later in life that might not sound like it was a beneficial thing?
Well, I will say that going to IIT Delhi gave me a big edge in life. I was one of 11 girls in a class of 370. And, 4 years put together, we were like 30 or 40 girls on campus of some 1,000 boys. So, yet we had our presence on the campus. We stuck together as a group, or not even as a group, just the fact that you feel special as a group that early in your life gives you a confidence which really carries you through later. I've been at many work environments. I think, my first job was at a tech company in a corporate R&D group. Again, not a career which many women went for. They go for tech, but they don't go for R&D. Or later, when I joined the Boston Consulting Group, a management consulting firm, they were. I had a baby at the time, and everyone was like, "You're the only mom who's joined BCG. Moms only leave BCG." But really, being a small group or being any form of a minority or that difference from the others never really brought me down or made me feel insecure or less confident, because of that one period that I had in my life where it was very positive to be in that environment and learn from it and grow and thrive in it. So I wouldn't say I was a little girl in IIT Delhi, but yes, that was a very formative part of my.
And also, there's an enormous pressure in India to have it figured out very early in your life. So, what would you say to a girl who feels lost when everyone else has a plan already?
I say no one has a plan. No one has a plan. It's a lie when people say they have it all figured out. So that should never bother you. If you'll ask people what they wanted to, just like you asked me what did I want to be when I was 15-year-old, 20-year-old, all of those were just ideas at that point. Our mind generates millions of ideas every day for us, and we don't have to pay attention to all of those ideas even our mind is generating. It's a factor of what's going on around us, what someone said yesterday, and how we are perceiving the world at that point of time. So yes, I mean, it's good to know what your short-term goals are, but But I think we all figure out based on us having, I would say, a sense of adventure about life and not be very fixated on, okay, this is my plan, this is what I'll do by a certain age or by a certain stage, and that's how I'm going to get closer to my plan. Because the other thing is, one, having a plan, the other thing is, rarely in life things go as per your plan. And that's what you need to be prepared for in life, that things will not go as per your plan. And then what are you going to do? And I think in those moments, having a sense of adventure for life to say, okay, this is fun, this I had not thought about earlier, and I'm going to do it differently, and being able to think in that moment, I think is more important than being very planned about your short-term or your medium-term goals. But specifically, I would say that having conversations the way you are doing now is a very good thing. The more we reach out, or I feel that you only get help when you ask for help. So reaching out, asking people for help, asking what they were, all the questions which you are asking today, Kimaya, are the questions which actually inform us. So it's okay to not have a plan as long as you are trying to form a plan for yourself.
Have you had those moments where things didn't go and you had to kind of go with the flow?
Many a times, many a times. I will not even be able to count the number of times that things have not gone as per my planning. Just like as a very basic example, when I was studying and living in US, I had not anticipated that I will move back to India. And it's very different to move back, even if you've grown up in India and studied and lived in India all your life. But if your entire professional life is in US and you decide later in life to move back to India, it's a very different experience. When you come here, you are an Indian, but you're a foreigner in some sense, because your formative professional years have not been here. So for me, I think that was a big moment when we came back. These are not the changes we had anticipated. We were not just getting used to living as adults in India. We were also I was getting used to living and working in a very different corporate environment than what I had trained myself to in US. And again, I would go back to saying, talk to people, ask for help, reach out, and have the confidence that you will go with the flow.
And you've built a career across business and philanthropy. And how do you think about the careers no one talks about in school? How should we think about them?
Yeah, that's a very good question. And I've often thought about it, that how will this change? Because some of these careers, and mine is a non-traditional career, but there's so many other very rewarding non-traditional careers that all our kids, not just girls, all our kids have no exposure to. And I don't know how we can in our curriculums change it. But one very basic thing which I think schools should start doing is they should start introducing at a very early stage at least some exposure to speakers and workplace visits. And they don't have to be exceptional achievers who have become heads of their organizations or really hitting the headlines, but just people who've taken non-traditional paths or are doing things differently or doing different things. It'll be very beneficial for young people to have that exposure through school, because that's when you're very actively thinking, and that one little exposure very early on in life, even it was in 9th grade, 10th grade, and you may not do, or you may not make a choice which is very different for college immediately. But maybe 10 years later in life, 20 years later in life, that one spark of inspiration will make you do and achieve something momentous, something really large. So that's one thing I think can be done differently to expose young people to many more careers and opportunities early on in life.
Yeah. And sometimes I feel that people choose career paths like based off of fear, like fear of failure or like fear of disappointing their parents. And how can someone shift that towards choosing on the basis of meaning and purpose?
Oh, you're asking tough questions now, Kimaya, but that's a real thing. That's a real thing. That's how we've been trained to survive, that you always are making your decisions based on chances of success versus chances of failure. So if you look at a startup, 1% of our startups are going to survive from a very early stage. So rationally, no one should be taking that decision. But how do you alter that mindset? And I've seen some things from some very good schools that I'm seeing, and some very good research that I'm seeing, that it's one thing to teach kids problem solving and creativity, but it's a completely different ball game to teach them an entrepreneurial mindset. What does it mean to be an entrepreneur? And it's an entrepreneurial mindset that you look at things differently. You take different decisions for the same problem. It teaches you a little bit of the ability, it teaches a little bit of that ability to be able to fail, because you'll try things differently. So I've seen some good work happening with developing entrepreneurial mindset in kids. In fact, the Delhi government schools did a very good job at it. For years, they've been teaching the entrepreneurial mindset to children through a very structured curriculum in their schools, and many other states are adopting it for government school kids, which I think is brilliant, because it doesn't mean that post grade 12 or post your high school graduation, you are immediately jumping and starting your own business. But having an entrepreneurial mindset is what it takes for you to succeed in life, irrespective of whether you're running a fund, you're running your own venture, you're working in a corporate, or you're working wherever. You always have to be creative, and that's what entrepreneurs are all about. And I'm hopeful, because I see that happening in small pockets in India.
Yeah, I agree that curiosity is very important. And you've led large teams handling big responsibilities and worked in male dominated spaces. So, what advice do you have for girls stepping into such a leadership role, even if it's just in school?
I think if you have your basics right, life is always about the basics and the small things. If you have your work, your content, then you should not let the noise around it bother you. You should always be confident about the work that you've done. You should always have an open mindset, and get as much feedback as you can as early in your life. That probably teaches you more than anything else. So give it your maximum, be good around your work, but at the same time keep an open mindset for what others and more experienced people are telling you about it, and the combination of that takes you really far.
Have you always been confident?
I've been always very confident, I will say, and I think my confidence comes more from the fact that I have been honest around giving everything 100% in that moment.
What's one lesson life taught you the hard way that you wish someone had told you when you were my age, like 17?
Listen to everyone, but then go with your own intuition and take your own decision. So often when we are seeking advice, we'll get forceful advice, we'll get non-committal advice. But you can take as much advice as you'd want, you can do as much research as you want. Even if after all of that research, you have to go back to that decision, which was your gut-based decision, take your own decisions. Because when you take your own decisions, you're always happy with the outcome that comes out of it. If you let other people decide for you, then if things don't work out well, then you're in this space where you might go back and think how you could have done things differently. So taking your own decisions is very important, and the sooner you start doing that, the better.
So, do you think independence is also very important?
I think independence is very important, but I would also say, Kimaya, asking for help, I almost look upon as resourcefulness. So I wouldn't say independence and self-reliance sometimes gets stretched or misinterpreted, I think, in terms of not asking for help. And I really think girls do that more than boys. They don't want to ask for help. They don't want to have mentors. They don't seek mentors. they want to do more on their own versus leveraging their whole teams or who can help them. And I think you can, if you have to go far in life, you have to go with a lot of other people. So you have to learn that skill of being able to create an ecosystem around yourself where you can actually reach out and others can reach out to you. That's what we are set up as a society naturally. So we should not give up on that when we enter the world of work. We should be very open to helping others and asking for help and seeking and reaching out. I think that's very important.
And you studied engineering at IIT Delhi and then did an MBA. So, how did you decide on those paths? And how did you think of changing careers?
It's not very deep over there. It was like more a formulaic journey for me when I was, like you're saying earlier, growing up, in the time I did, the decision was between, do you do engineering or do you do medical? So that's how engineering was chosen. And if you have to get ahead, then you do MBA at some point of time. But I always had this deep desire to be heading a tech company. And I thought, with my engineering skills, I may not get there. So should I not just do an MBA? Really, when I went to do an MBA, that's the plan that I had gone with. But once I reached there, University of Chicago was just a very different environment. We were fortunate to be studying with Nobel laureates and fortunate to be studying in a very global class where no one really came with a plan. They came to explore. And that's one thing which I feel I learned very late in life, that you should be exploring at some places. And that's the value of being there, that it gives you the luxury of exploring and not having to walk down a beaten path. So more than what I learned in my business school, I think it was this understanding that yes, a world of opportunities opens up to you when you open your mind. You can actually explore in life. You can actually look at having that space to be able to try out a few different things through internships, research projects, associations with different clubs at school, was honestly something I never experienced before. When I studied engineering, you're almost, you pre-select into a department. There is only a set of things that you can do post that. And Indian school system, college system doesn't allow you to do anything which is interdisciplinary. So it's a very straight-jacketed approach. From there to be in as flexible an education system, yet a very high-performing higher education system like that of the US, in of itself was a very enriching experience for me.
So, do you see changes in career or paths as a positive thing, or how do you approach it?
I don't know. It depends on, there's one way of looking at it, that the more you keep doing something, the more you keep becoming an expert in that area. So if I were to look at it purely from an ROI perspective, maybe the ROI on continuing to do the same thing is way higher than changing your path, multiple times. But if I look at the value that you would unlock by being where one, your heart desires to be and where you're meant to be, which I believe is the job that I'm now doing at the foundation, which is very different from an engineering job. It's very different from a management consulting job, but I've been here almost 15 years and not a day have I thought that, what am I doing here? I think each day I've showed up at work thinking I'm doing very important work. I'm creating value, not just for myself, but for millions of kids and young people. And I really belong here, has made me perform at a level at which I may not have performed in any of the roles I was earlier. So it has probably unlocked value, not just for me, but for everyone who gets benefited from the work that I'm doing, which is not even countable.
Yeah. And so finally, many young girls feel unsure about choosing between STEM, business, or liberal arts. So what advice would you give to someone who's exploring and doesn't know what to pick yet?
Yeah, one limitation that we have as an education system is that you make that choice very early on in life. You know, you're making that choice almost at grade 12 if you were studying in India, because the flexibility to move streams is limited in India. So the only way to maximize that choice towards a career that will be to your liking is probably try and start some of that exploration through talking to other people in those careers, by doing work visits or workplace visits if possible. And there's so much on the internet, and in general there's so much information out there, as much as you can early on in life, but and make those decisions. That said, one should not be afraid of changing course later in life. And that's one thing which I feel now, having worked for 25 plus years, and hopefully many more years to come. Like, 5, 10, 15 years are not, even 15 years are not that long in a career to be able to change course. If you want to, and you're more compelled and drawn towards something, then go for it. So don't be so afraid of changing courses, because this is not what you had originally anticipated to do. If you want to do something else later in life, then you go and change.
Thank you so much for sharing your journey and wisdom with us. And for every young girl listening, I hope this conversation reminded you that your story doesn't have to be perfect and your path doesn't have to be linear. Whether you're in a small town or a big city, whether you know what you want or are still deciding, you are allowed to dream big and you have time to figure it out. So if this episode helped you in any way, please share it with a friend who needs to hear it. And remember, every confident woman you admire has started at one point and has been confused. So thank you so much for being here and sharing your wisdom with us. And it's been a pleasure to talk with you.
Thank you, Kimaya. You summarized it so beautifully. Pleasure talking to you.